Thank you. We now come to the next item of business. I call the Minister to move motion number 2 on political parties, elections and referendums. Minister Simon Hall.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I beg to move that the House approves the final draft Electoral Commission strategy and policy statement. Madam Deputy Speaker, it's a pleasure to be able to bring forward this important strategy and policy statement for parliamentary consideration this afternoon. Now, we may disagree on many things, but I think that there is one thing I hope that we can disagree with, that there are lots of things in our political life to raise the blood pressure, lots of issues, etc. I would say respectfully to the House that this strategy and policy statement is not one of them, for reasons which I shall set out for the House. The Electoral Commission strategy and policy statement was laid before Parliament on the 14th of December 2023 for approval by a resolution of both Houses within a 40-day period in accordance, Madam Deputy Speaker, with Section 4C, subsection A of the Political Parties Elections and Referendum Act 2000. I want to start, if I may, by asserting clearly and unequivocally a concern which I know many honourable and right honourable members have had and which I wish to nail from the outset. This statement, this strategy, in no way undermines or challenges the robust, legislatively underpinned independence of the Electoral Commission. The Commission is an important part in our national life. It has a key and important role, and this House, and I believe the country at large, recognises that. The statement, Madam Deputy Speaker, gives to the government no new teeth or power. How, if, when the Commission faces into the guidance is up to it and the scrutiny of Mr. Speaker's committee, the role of which is exercised on behalf of the House. The Commission, as set out in the Elections Act, only has a duty to have regard. We are not saying, not least because we can't and don't wish to, that the Commission will or must. We create no new duty to report to government, only for the Speaker's Committee to maintain its relations with the Commission. And the Commission will continue to report only to Parliament, as it has done since its creation in 2000. Let me just make this place, and then of course I'll give way to the Honourable Gentleman. The statement does not, and again I want to make this very clear because it's a twin approach of independence, this statement does not politicise Mr. Speaker's committee or the office of the Speaker with regards to its Commission functions. And of course I give way to the Chairman of the Select Committee.
I'm listening to what the Minister says with a little bit of disbelief. If the Commission's not going to have to take any notice of it, have regard to it, doesn't actually have to act on it, what is it here for? And if having regard to means taking seriously and doing something about, then that applies both to the Commission and to Mr. Speaker's committee, which has to oversee the Commission and its work. Doesn't that compromise the neutrality and independence of the Speaker as well as the Electoral Commission? It's a very serious matter, this.
If that were true, it would be a serious matter, but I'd say to the Honourable Gentleman, with whom I have huge respect, who chairs the Select Committee with much distinction, that I don't see it that way, and neither does the government. But he takes me, having said what this not is, to why it is that we are doing it. That is the nub of this particular issue, and I will turn to the text. May I just answer his honourable friend's point, and then of course I'll give way to the right honourable gentleman. I see, that the role of this government, of any party which has the honour to be in government in the United Kingdom, as being the pro tem custodian of our democracy. It's why we have election law, it's why I am the elections minister. It is, as we discussed last week in the Holocaust Memorial Day debate, Madam Deputy Speaker, a fragile flower under huge pressure. And we believe that it is timely, not least because of the raft of changes which have flown through and been delivered by statutory instrument from the recent Elections Act, and also hugely cognizant of the threats to the robustness and resilience of our democracy presented by overseas interference, fake news, deep fakes and artificial intelligence, that taking that solemn role as the pro tem custodian, holding that flame of democracy whilst we serve in government, is important. And we believe it is important to underpin rather than undermine the work of the Commission by standing shoulder to shoulder with them in the important work which they have set before them, and which I will come on to when I have taken the Right Honourable Gentleman's intervention.
I'm grateful for accepting. I am a member of the Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee, and we warned in our report about the threat to the independence of the Commission as a result of the government's legislation with regard to the strategy statement. What I can't understand, I can understand where the Minister is coming from when he says we're not using the expression must, because that would be a direction, but the government is repeatedly using the expression should. And therefore, the use of the expression should asks the question in my mind is if the Commission then ignores the should, what then happens? Because there's a sort of implied threat around a should.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Right Honourable Gentleman helpfully takes me to the next part of my remarks about the should, would and must. So let's just canter through, but canter through with some degree of attention and seriousness, what the priorities set out in the statement are. And in all seriousness, and I hope that the House knows me well enough, but to use that phrase, it's not just parroting a line, that I am serious in what I'm about to say, because I think it is important. In all seriousness, I really would question whether any honourable or right honourable member of this House in any party would take any exception to anything which I'm about to say, which is contained within the statement. Madam Deputy Speaker, let me just... I think if the Right Honourable Gentleman would be a little patient, he will have his question answered, but he asks his question in his way, and in the words of Frank Sinatra, I shall answer it in mine. The first paragraph rehearses the key and important point, that the Electoral Commission is the independent regulatory body responsible for giving guidance and support to electoral registration officers and returning officers in undertaking electoral registration and conducting elections and recall petitions effectively and in accordance with the law. Anybody disagree with that? No. Paragraph 2. The Chair of the Commission has the responsibility in law for acting as the chief counting officer at national referendums in the UK, and the staff of the Commission support the Chair in that role when it is required to work through the electoral authorities to deliver such events. So the delivery of smooth and seamless referenda. Not, I would suggest, a revolutionary power grab by His Majesty's government. The government believes that the Electoral Commission, at paragraph 3, has an important role to play in maintaining the integrity of our elections and public confidence in that integrity. I don't think that's a point that will get the division bells ringing. The duty to have regard does not require the Commission to give lesser priority to, in answer to the Select Committee Chair's question, the duty to have regard does not require the Commission to give lesser priority to or to ignore any of its other statutory duties. The Electoral Commissioners and the Commission's executive leadership will remain responsible for determining the Commission's strategy priorities. how it should discharge its duties, including day-to-day operations, and the allocation of its resources as agreed by the relevant parliaments. It will be for the Commission to determine how to factor the statement into its decision-making processes and corporate documents, such as the 5-year plan. Paragraph 4. One of the government's policy priorities is ensuring our democracy is secure, fair, modern and transparent. One could easily transpose the word government for Parliament. Who is going to argue with ensuring that our democracy is secure? Who is going to argue that our democracy shouldn't be fair, modern or transparent? It goes on to say that a priority is to ensure that those who are entitled to vote will always be able to exercise that right freely, securely and in an informed way, that fraud, intimidation and interference have no place in our democracy, that we are stewards of our shared democratic heritage, which we keep up to date for our age. It's my custodian point again, Madam Deputy Speaker. In paragraph 5, a leading objective is the tackling of electoral fraud. Anybody in this House in favour of electoral fraud? Didn't think so, and rightly so. Let me just finish these points. That the Commission should support continued effective delivery of voter identification by raising public awareness about the requirement to show an approved form of photographic ID before taking part in UK parliamentary elections, local elections in England and elections in Northern Ireland, as they have done for the last 20 years or so. In close questioning from the Lords Constitutional Committee just the other month, this was an issue which was raised, and the important role of government, the Commission and other agencies, Madam Deputy Speaker, in raising the profile and public awareness of voter identification was a matter which we discussed at some length. I'll give way now
to the Minister read out at one level a list of the things that the committee is obliged to do by law anyway. So why you have to restate them in this paper here, I don't know. But what the advice to the committee and to the Speaker's Committee was very clearly, if certain items are identified as priorities for the Commission, then per se other things are a lesser priority. So, for example, overseas voters registration, but registration of voters in this country, where 8 million people are not on the register, is not listed as a priority. Right. So this does actually skew the work of the Electoral Commission, whether the Minister likes it or not.
Well, the honourable gentleman was obviously so busy trying to find his rebuttal point that he didn't listen to my answer to his first question, where I set out very clearly the duty to have regard does not require the Commission to give lesser priority to or to ignore any of its statutory duties. The Electoral Commissioners and the Commission's executive leadership will remain responsible for determining the Commission's strategy priorities and how it should discharge its duties. This statement in no way, as I say, undermines, countermands or double guesses any work of the Commission. The paper goes on to talk about tackling electoral fraud, something I know we would all wish to do. Crucially, it talks about the role of the Commission in working with returning officers and others to ensure the maximum opportunity for those with disabilities to be able to take part in the ballot on the day and in the polling stations, if they so choose. Now, there is nobody, I would suggest, in this place or in the other place, who would think that that was not a noble aim. And at the very mention of noble aims, I give way to the Right Honourable Gentleman, the Member for Hayes and Honiton.
I'm grateful for that. I just come back to this. What this statement is doing is, in effect, setting priorities for the Commission. And that has both operational consequences but budgetary consequences as well. So what are the consequences for the Commission if they, like me, think this is daft and completely ignore the government statement?
Well, I just don't see that happening, because the Commission itself understands the importance of this. This is not a directional document. This is an augmenting document. This is saying, because there are difficult things which face our democracy, and the Right Honourable Gentleman knows that, this is saying that the government, whichever part of government, not as a party government, but government as an entity, is in lockstep with the Commission in full support of the work that it does to preserve, protect, enhance our democracy. We felt it was timely to have this statement as part of the that flows from the Act, the Secretary of State to provide a statement to augment and to clarify those things which flow from the Elections Act and subsequent statutory instruments. It will be entirely up to the Commission, who every honourable and right honourable member is absolutely right, are doing these things either in whole or in part already, to set their own both priorities from the list, to give greater or lesser attention to things as they see that they need it, something they say, well, that's already done and that's all in hand, but we really do need to augment this. The voter authorisation certificate is a prime example. Those are things that I would expect, and I think all of us would expect, the Commission to spend a certain amount of time on in raising the awareness. And I could go to the Honourable Gentleman from the SNP.
I thank the Minister. I mean, he's doing a really, commendable job, because clearly he's inherited a piece of legislation that was never really part of. It was part of a different agenda from a different era. I was going to ask him for a bit of. He said there are things that needed clarified. He mentioned the voter identification certificate. Can he give some examples of other things that need clarified? What does he think that the Electoral Commission is currently doing that's wrong, that needs to be righted by this statement?
Minister.
Nothing. And if the honourable gentleman, is looking for that, then he has completely misunderstood the purpose of the statement. He has completely understood the operational independence of the Commission, and he has apportioned completely malign intentions to the government. I know he wants to serve a bit, oh, this is mission creep and this is something else and the government trying to take over an independent body. It is nothing of the sort. I know, Madam Deputy Speaker, others wish to speak. They can read the statement for themselves, but I hope the examples which I have given to the House indicate that this is augmenting what the Commission does. My department and I have good relations with the Commission. We never seek to direct. We admire and respect the work that Mr. Speaker's committee does, discharging its duty. I have the honour to be a member of that committee, as does the Select Committee Chair, the Honourable Lady for Luton, the Honourable Lady for Lancaster and others. So it is not even weighted in His Majesty's government's favour. This is a benign statement. This is a benign statement supporting the Commission in their work, addressing the changes which have been introduced post the Elections Act and statutory instruments. It is all part of our process to ensure that our electoral system is resilient, open, transparent, secure, and has the maximum access to all who have the eligibility to cast a vote on whichever election day it may happen to be. How they vote is entirely up to them. How the Commission set their priorities is entirely up to it. Mr. Speaker and his committee will hold the Commission to account, not Parliament. There is no mandation in this statement that the Commission has to provide a statement or a report to us annually or quarterly, to my department or to the Secretary of State. The usual communication channels between the Speaker's Committee and the Commission remain. I would suggest to honourable and right honourable members, given the fragility of our democracy, given the fragility and the outside pressures facing most Western democracies today, to try to ascribe to this rather benign statement of goodwill ill intention, Machiavellian motivation, and some sort of surreptitious purpose of undermining democracy. They demean themselves, and they demean and weaken democracy. I beg to move.
The question is motion number 2, as on the order paper. Shadow Minister Florence Eshalomi.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I do thank the Minister for his introduction on this. And I'll be honest, and I have a lot of respect for the Minister, but even listening to that, I struggled. And I think through gritted teeth, the Minister tried, but failed desperately to justify why this statement is needed. You cannot flog a dead horse, and if something ain't broke, it doesn't need to be fixed. Madam Deputy Speaker, in 2000, the last Labour government set up the Electoral Commission to act as a guardian of our democratic system. And at the heart of this decision was the need for a central pillar of independence within our politics. a body that the public could trust would not suffer interference, not just from the government of the day, but from future governments of any shade. A body that would not fear the consequences of taking on major parties when they broke the rules. A body that could provide information about our system from trusted sources free of political interference. And over 20 years later, the independence has become a cornerstone of public trust in our democracy. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, we really need to put this statement strategy into context. Sadly, 14 years of Tory failure has left so many people feeling powerless under the decline of this government. The fact is, we've seen people see their hard-earned money go to Tory friends and VIP donors, and we've seen people who followed the rules to protect the NHS, seeing those who are making the rules break them. And the fact that I think about, I grew up not too far from this place on a council estate in Brixton, just a bus ride away. And what really annoyed me and what really angered me was seeing people make decisions about my community by people who didn't feel the ramifications. And I think the government really needs to reflect on this, and I hope the Minister will, and realise why trust in our politics is at a record low after so many scandals from this place. At a time, and at this time, the independence of the Electoral Commission has acted as a bedrock in our system against this decline in trust. And while we've seen recent drops in confidence and satisfaction in the system, the majority of people do remain satisfied with the voting process. Now, I agree with the Minister. There are things we can always do to improve our democratic process. But, I mean, to use this statement is setting a political agenda for an independent watchdog is completely wrong, Minister, and you know it. And this isn't just me saying this.
Order, order. The honourable lady is making a powerful speech, but I beg of her, would she please call the minister, not you. I have to say, I'm not blaming the honourable lady. Bad examples have been set from by senior members of this House about calling other members you or minister. And phrases like "you know it" is exactly why we don't have that way of doing things here. The honourable lady has to say the occupant of the chair knows it. Yeah. And I do apologise for putting her up on this because she is far from being the first person to get this wrong. But I do think that if we don't start to put it right, then people won't understand the reason for the rule. So I'd be grateful to her. Thank you.
I thank you for highlighting that, Madam Deputy Speaker, and totally agree with you, and I refer to the Minister. And this isn't just me saying that there are issues with this statement. The Speaker's Committee on the Electoral Commission, the Levelling Up Housing Communities Committee, and even the Electoral Commission themselves have all highlighted problems with this statement. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, these aren't just random bodies. In fact, they are so respected that the government themselves made it mandatory to consult them prior to bringing this strategy and policy statement to the House. Yet when all three sections and bodies raised the same concerns, the government simply railroaded through the statement. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, you'd expect a government that disregards the powerful points made by these respected bodies to have a clear evidence base for their actions, and for the Minister to basically repeat what the Electoral Commission are doing fantastically well is not the basis for this statement. And in announcing the statement, the government said, and I quote, "This guidance addresses the concerns raised in Lord Eric Pickle's independent review into electoral fraud that the current system of oversight of the Electoral Commission is not fit for purpose." And given this statement, we'd expect to find a robust justification for this in what the Minister outlined. But all we get on a system of oversight is just 3 lines. No detail, no justification, no evidence. Just 3 blurred lines on page 50 of this now 7-year-old report. Wow. And when the Levelling Up and Housing Communities Committee found that, and I quote, "they are not aware that any of those concerns remain current from the relevant section of the Pickles report," and when so many respected bodies are saying this statement is unnecessary, Surely the Minister must see that the very basis for making a statement is simply not good enough. Yes. Madam Deputy Speaker, under this government, trust in politics and our democratic institutions is at an all-time low. We all need to work hard to restore that trust. Give people the belief that their voice matters and that decisions are made with them, not to them. This is another example of decisions being made to them. And instead, the content of this statement completely undermines the Electoral Commission. This represents a dangerous threat to the independence of a vital watchdog. MPs from all parties have condemned it. Respected bodies have rejected it. And this is further proof that we need a new approach to a democracy that works for everyone. So I'd urge everyone to join us today in voting against this dangerous politicisation of our independent elections watchdog.
Thank you. Chloe Smith.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I rise only to make a short contribution to today's debate. I welcome the work that has been done on this policy statement, and reading through the examination, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the Speaker's Committee has done on this statement, and indeed that the Select Committee has done on this statement. I'm glad to see the Government having responded to elements of the critiques that had been put. I also acknowledge the role that the Speaker, that Mr Speaker and his committee play in the existing governance of the Electoral Commission. That is incredibly important, and it does its job well, and I'd like to make sure that that is on record. For me, and I suspect for other colleagues who supported the Elections Act, which is, of course, the source of today's instrument, there are a couple of additional arguments that ought to be put alongside what the Minister has said. The first of those is that it's a reasonable vehicle to have a strategy and policy statement. Other regulators have this. Ofcom and Ofgem spring to mind. But secondly, this is an opportunity. This instrument, this debate right now, is an opportunity for the whole of the Chamber to engage in the Electoral Commission's work. I rather wish, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the Chamber was even fuller. But be that as it may, this is rightly an opportunity for more colleagues, more honourable members and right honourable members than those that sit on the Speaker's Committee or on the Select Committee. It is an opportunity for them to take part. I am happy to give way to the Chairman of the Select Committee.
Thank the Honourable Lady for giving way. Does not accept that comparing this to other regulators is profoundly different and confusing the way she's put it. Regulating the water industry and government quite rightly having a view about how our water purity, sewage, etc. should be controlled. It's completely different to the government interfering in how the Electoral Commission, which is independent, should do its operations.
I'm grateful. I'm very grateful for the honourable gentleman rising to make that point. My answer to him, which I make in a respectful tone of voice, I'm glad to see the depth of work he's done on this, and I hope he recognises that there are those on this side of the House who have also spent very many years focusing on this area. My answer to him would be that there are partial similarities and there are partial differences. I think he's wrong, and I think some of his colleagues are unwise to throw quite so many accusations in quite such a tone at today's work, because in part there are good reasons for why it is reasonable to set out in one place matters to do with the government's priorities that are adjacent and relevant to, as point 1 of the statement sets out, matters to do with that regulators. That is what today's document does. Now, he's right, of course. He's absolutely correct that that is somewhat different to the more detailed work that is done by the regulator of water, the regulator of electricity, and so on. He's also right, of course, to point to the essential independence of the Electoral Commission, and I'm glad he's done that, because it gives me the opportunity to add my emphasis to this as well. There is nothing, I think, to be concerned about from this statement in respect of the independence of the Commission. We have heard those assurances from the Minister today, and that's very, very important. It's extremely important that he has set that out, and I'm glad that he has, and I add my voice to the essential nature of that. But I just wanted to briefly go back to the need for there to be wider participation in the work of the Electoral Commission. Obviously, we are able to spend periodically a few minutes on question time to the Speakers Committee for the Electoral Commission, and good work is done through that mechanism. But it is perhaps somewhat indirect, and it is important for the whole of the Chamber to be able to look at the important issues that sit behind our Constitution and our electoral system. I want to go on to a point on the contents of the strategy and policy statement, and I'm working in particular from the points that we see in paragraph 19, where it is emphasised that this regulator needs to work together with others to discharge its duties. So I want to particularly emphasise that in the context of the demands that are being made of regulators this year about artificial intelligence. And honourable members will be very well aware of this from the white paper on regulating artificial intelligence, which was set out last year, and I think on which we are shortly to have an update from a different department. But the key point is this: it's the world's biggest election year. Billions of citizens are going to the ballot box, including here, of course. And these elections will basically be the first to happen since these significant advances in AI. There are legitimate concerns, anxieties, and indeed evidence from our security services to ask whether this technology will be used for fabrication, for manipulation, and to affect the integrity of elections. I mean, it goes without saying that the integrity of elections matters so that people's free choices achieve what they intend. Now, the government has asked regulators across their fields to set out how they will work with artificial intelligence. Clearly, the Electoral Commission is one of those regulators and somewhat in the hot seat for doing so, I would say, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is my view that the Electoral Commission and indeed connected enforcement agencies could helpfully set out at this point of the year the preparation they have done and give reassurance publicly about their readiness for elections this year in respect of these very, very grand concerns and anxieties. So I'd like to ask the Minister, with reference to the substance of today's statement, what discussions he has had with the Electoral Commission on its work with other regulators, for example, as per paragraph 19 of this statement, and indeed as per paragraph 20 of this statement, which talks about keeping up to date with the realities of campaigning activities. And I think that's a good tone to take there. So I'd also like to ask the Minister in what way he expects to keep the statement itself and future iterations of the statement updated in regards to technology and indeed updated in regards to national security considerations, where those might be relevant, Madam Deputy Speaker. I agree with the Minister that we here are stewards of our democracy, and I've sat in his particular position before, and as I set out the approach that we ought to always strive for our elections to be secure and fair and modern and accessible and transparent, I agree with him. This is some of the most important work that we can do. But I just conclude my remarks here today by just saying gently that it is a legitimate function of government to have to address itself to those principles. Of course it is. That's what we need the government and Parliament to do, because we are the custodians of law as well as of those principles. We did that in the Elections Act, of course. We did it prior to that in PPERA itself, and before then, and since then, and will continue to do so, because it is a legitimate function of government, when asked to do so, perhaps through manifesto commitments in a democratic process, to enact changes and updates to electoral law. We do that through Parliament. So I return to the point, Madam Deputy Speaker, that it is good that we have this wider opportunity for Parliament to be able to engage in the work of the Electoral Commission while crucially respecting its design and independence, and I'm glad we're getting that chance to do so today.
SNP spokesman Patrick Grady.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to follow the member for Norwich North, not least because she was at the time the Minister that brought in the Elections Act that has given rise to the motion today. The Minister on the front bench, whom I hold in the greatest of regard, is a slightly lost count. I think either the 5th or the 6th minister from the 2nd government department that's had responsibility for manifestations of that act, whether it was the bill proceedings or delegated legislation since its first reading in 2021. And that really doesn't say much for the continuity of this government or its commitment to getting the regulation of elections right. And perhaps that's largely a surprise. And in fact, as I alluded to, I think much of the statement and much of what we're doing today is actually a hangover from a slightly different era and more muscular era of the Conservative government. And it's a pity because the Elections Act, on one hand, was a massive missed opportunity to properly consolidate and update electoral law for the next quarter of the 21st century. And on the other hand, it actually provided for significant regression in the access to and potential fairness of UK-wide elections and certain other elections in England and Wales. It removed proportionality from mayoral elections. It imposed the burden of photo identification, particularly in poorer and marginalised communities, and at the same time extended the franchise to millions of voters from overseas with much less in the way of verification. And now, on the floor of the House today, the cherry on the top, the crowning glory of this government's interventions on our election process, a strategy and policy statement for the Electoral Commission, a body that is supposed to be the independent regulator of elections across these islands, a body which already has extremely clear functions set out on a statutory basis in the Political Parties Elections and Referendums Act 2000. And that's perhaps my first question to the Minister. What is this statement? Is it the law? Is it a statutory instrument? Is it delegated legislation? I think it's quite telling, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the Government has tabled it for debate in the Chamber rather than passing it to a DL committee. And I have a feeling, because I have a feeling that was its original intention, and I have a feeling the Minister would have rather preferred that in terms of the scrutiny and publicity that he's now facing. But here we are. Here we are in the Chamber, because I'm not entirely sure if a motion to approve a strategy and policy statement is actually delegated legislation. It seems as if the Electoral Commission is not legally bound to follow the strategy and policy, only to have regard to it. But as others have asked, what does that mean? What happens if the Commission finds itself in conflict between the statement and the statute? Can it be challenged in the courts? And if so, by whom? By political parties? By non-party campaigners? By the government itself? And if it's not the law, how is it to be enforced? Who decides if the Commission is compliant or not? Now, I know the Minister and you, Madam Deputy Speaker, enjoy some deftly deployed Latin, so perhaps it's a good time to ask the classical question, qui custodiet ipsos custodes? Who watches the watchers? Or in this case, who commissions the commissioners? Well, the answer to that question is it's this House. Yeah. It's Parliament that recommends commissioners for appointment by the monarch by means of an humble address. It was Parliament that established the Commission in the first place by the 2000 Act. The Commission is accountable to the Speaker's Committee of members of this House, and through other mechanisms to the Parliaments of Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. So perhaps we can look at the statement and the motion before us and ask, is the government usurping the sovereignty of this House? Because the motion is unamendable, much as some of us would have liked to amend it to mandate the government to abandon the statement and indeed repeal the relevant section of the Act, and the statement itself is unamendable. The government ran a very limited consultation, limited in time and limited in the number of consultees. So where is the parliamentary sovereignty in that? The only way that the Scottish Government was able to express its views was in a letter from my good friend, the Minister for Parliamentary Business, George Adam MSP, to the Levelling Up Housing and Communities Committee of the House. But then that's probably a pretty fair reflection of what this government thinks the place of Scotland's Parliament and Government is in the modern United Kingdom, a subsidiary of the Housing Committee of the House of Commons. The statement doesn't have any effect on the Electoral Commission's functions in the devolved nations. But by definition, that increases divergence of practice, which is perhaps a surprise given the UK Government's determination to promote the broad shoulders of the Union. In his letter, Minister Adam makes clear that, like almost every other stakeholder, in fact every other voice we've heard today, with the exception of the government benches, who has taken an interest in this matter, that he considers the strategy and policy statement to be an unwelcome and unnecessary interference with the independence of the Electoral Commission. And he also makes the extremely valid point that the statement's preamble says that it does not suggest that the Commission should cease to carry out any of its other statutory duties. But he therefore suggests quite rightly that this appears to raise the alarming prospect that such a suggestion might feature in future versions of the SPS. But surely a change in the functions of the Electoral Commission would require a change in the statute. So it would be helpful to hear the Minister's response to those points, because it gets to the heart of what this statement is or is not supposed to achieve. If it is largely a restatement of the principles and functions that the Commission is already carrying out, as the Minister sought to assure us in his most emollient tones, then it seems to me to be surplus to requirements. So perhaps the Minister could give us some examples of what he thinks that the Commission will do differently or better than it is currently doing as a result of the statement. And if the statement is simply changing the emphasis on certain functions, then it goes back to the point I raised in my intervention. Why is that necessary? What does he think the Commission is doing wrong, and why does the government need to direct what is supposed to be an independent regulator? The reality is, of course, that the Elections Act was just one piece in the pernicious series of steps that this government in its different incarnations has taken to shield itself from accountability and reduce the openness and transparency of democracy across the UK. The Dissolution and Calling of Parliaments Act, which restored the prerogative of calling an election to the Prime Minister alone, with all the consequences that is having for the Tory backbenches and the press gallery and the podcast studios of Westminster. The Police, Crime and Sentencing and Courts Act, which has restricted the right to protest. And the UK Internal Market Act and sundry other pieces of legislation arising from Brexit, which have ridden roughshod over the Sewell Convention and deliberately weakened and undermined the devolution settlement. So perhaps it shouldn't be a surprise that the government has the independent regulator of elections in its next sights. The Conservative Party is clearly not going to have an easy time at the next election, and it has clearly decided that therefore neither should anybody else. If they're a candidate, a political party, a non-party campaigner, an electoral registration officer, a returning officer or some other official, or indeed the Electoral Commission itself. The time to introduce elections legislation reform is usually at the beginning of a parliament, so that everybody involved has time to prepare and implement the changes, not at the desperate fag end of a session as part of what appears to be a scorched earth policy by the current government. And that does mean, though, that there are some serious questions for the official opposition and all of us writing manifestos. Are the official opposition prepared to repeal or amend aspects of the Elections Act, should they have the opportunity to do so at some point in the future? Will they commit to getting rid of the statement and certainly not publish any of their own? In the meantime, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Government needs to hear from the House that this statement is at best unnecessary and at worst, which I think is more likely, an undermining of the independence of the Electoral Commission and indeed its accountability to this House rather than to the Government of the day. Members of government benches, wherever they are, because they're clearly not that interested in this, who believe far more fervently in parliamentary sovereignty than those of us who believe in popular sovereignty do, should consider whether this really is the road that they want to go down. And if they don't, they should join those of us who respect the independence of the Electoral Commission and who want to see fairness and transparency across elections in these islands in voting against this statement, whatever it is, this afternoon.
I'm just very aware that this debate has to finish at 4:13, so I would ask colleagues to be aware of that because I have 5 more speakers, so perhaps a little brevity might help. Clive Betts.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm speaking today as Chair of the Deluxe Select Committee and also a member of the Speakers Committee on the Electoral Commission as well, declare my interest as Vice President of the Local Government Association. I say to the Minister, no doubt when he got the responsibility for local government finance, he thought he got the hospital pass that perhaps some ministers get from time to time with a very challenging brief and very difficult situation. And then he realised the real hospital pass was coming down the road and he was going to have to try and justify this statement today. Now, he did a good job in telling us what the responsibilities of the Electoral Commission currently are. What he didn't do is to give us one example of what the Commission isn't doing right at present that they will be made to do right and better by this statement. What are the problems that need addressing? And if we agree this today, if the motion passes this House, what will be different tomorrow than is today? He didn't give us one example to do that. And that is why, in the end, both the Deluxe Select Committee and the Speakers Committee said that at worst this compromises the independence of the Electoral Commission. The Electoral Commission believes that as well. At best it's simply unnecessary and will contribute nothing whatsoever. I say to the Minister, and he's made the point, that democracy of course is very precious. It's all our responsibilities to protect it. And the Electoral Commission is a really important part of that process. The oversight of elections and the electoral processes in this country. So it's important that they are seen to be independent, not just practically independent, but seen and perceived to be independent as well. And whatever the Minister says about the very detailed way he went through this particular statement, the perception is the government is trying to do something to influence the Electoral Commission. If they're not, what is the point of this? If they have no intention to influence the Electoral Commission, just let them get on with the current situation and be accountable to Mr Speaker's committee. That's surely where we ought to be. Because Mr Speaker's committee and the Legal Exec Committee had very helpful advice from very senior and authoritative officers in this House, who concluded in reporting to our committees that this statement would constitute an interference with the Commission's operational independence. That's what we were advised. We were advised that there was no cogent explanation put forward as to why this statement was needed, and we haven't heard one today. In fact, the Minister's done the best job he could, but it wasn't a coherent and cogent explanation. And it's hard to see, we were told, how this statement would help the Commission in its work. It pointed out that it says that the Commission has to have regard, should have regard to the way in which it operates and gives it certain priorities. Those, if you identify amongst the Commission's many responsibilities that some have to be a priority, it means that others are a less priority. It's a pretty self-evident position to conclude. So those other things that are less important, that is directing the Commission as to where it concentrates its resources on the things the government think are important, or the Commission's just going to ignore it and walk away. Either way, we don't know what we're here for. Either we're here to interfere with the work of the Commission and direct it and give it priorities, or we're simply here to say to the Commission, well, there's some things the government thinks are rather nice, but go away and ignore them because they don't really matter, because that's not your statutory responsibility. Because ultimately, the Commission has statutory responsibilities, and one of the things that we were given advice about on the committee was that some of the wording in this statement here is different to the wording in law. So you could get a situation where the Commission is caught between following the law and following this guidance, and then you end up in court with lawyers making a lot of money on the conflicts that exist. And where you get confusion in wording, the lawyers will always make money out of it. And I think we ought to be very careful, or the government ought to be very careful about what it's asking us to do today. Reference was made to other regulators. What I would say is the other regulators, like Ofwat, are essentially agents of government. They're there to carry out government policy about how our water should be kept clean. The Electoral Commission is not an agent of government, and therefore it is very different to the other regulators, the other agents that the Honourable Lady referred to before, and indeed ministers have as well. I will give way to my own point.
It goes back to the argument, the question I put to the Minister. On those other regulators, if they fail to abide by the direction given by government, they're removed. Yeah. But we've not heard what the consequences are from government of not abiding by the range of shoulds within this statement.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. There's no consequences laid out for what would happen if what's in this statement isn't followed by the Electoral Commission. Because in the end... Yes, sir. Yeah.
Actually, I wonder whether it's worse than that, because not only should those regulators be removed if they're found to be incompetent, but given the state of the water industry with Ofwat and the Environment Agency, we're in a situation where the government probably ought to be stepping in and removing those regulators, but it's not.
Yes, perhaps the government ought to give more attention to those particular problems rather than the problem that doesn't seem to exist, because the Minister hasn't actually told us what are the problems are that this statement is trying to address. But I think the Minister is going to help us with that, is he?
I'd politely like to ask the Honourable Gentleman, the Chairman of the Select Committee, where in my remarks, as the Minister opening this debate, did I talk about other regulatory bodies and try to rank them pari passu with the Electoral Commission? I'll tell you where I did it. I didn't.
Well, Well, the point is that his right honourable friend did raise that, and she was the minister before for this, who brought the bill through Parliament. So I think that is worth at least taking seriously what she had to say to us. What I'm saying to the minister, he didn't actually tell us what the problems are this statement is meant to address. It'd be very helpful if he could just tell us what the problems are. Sorry, Madam Speaker. I'm just trying to encourage the minister to be helpful to us, but obviously I was struggling in that regard. Yes, I think is the minister now going to be helpful?
I am trying to be helpful. Read Hansard. I've answered the honourable gentleman's question 3 times. If he neither understands nor can hear the answer, that's not my fault.
Yeah, okay. The minister is clearly trying to be helpful but not succeeding. It comes back to the point in the end, isn't it? The Electoral Commission's priorities do not have to be the government's priorities, and the government hasn't got any right to direct the Electoral Commission in its work. And back to this point again, what is the problem this statement today, this motion, is trying to address? If the minister can't articulate that and tell us what the problem is and how this statement is going to change the behaviour of the Electoral Commission, then quite frankly, Madam Deputy Speaker, every member of this House is busy, got lots of things to do. Have we just waited 90 minutes of our time, and people will come back in 2 years' time and find this motion today has had no impact at all? I rather hope that's the case, because the other scenario is it's actually meant that the government is interfering in the Electoral Commission's work, and I think that's the worst of the 2 ways of looking at this.
Cat Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's a pleasure to follow my honourable friend for Sheffield South East with his comments there, and I associate myself with everything that he has said, and it allows me to cut short my speech a little bit in order to progress, as I'm conscious of time, Madam Deputy Speaker. But when preparing for this debate, I did take a little bit of time to look at what the public thought of the Electoral Commission. And there was some research carried out, and the words most frequently used by voters to describe the Commission were independent, important, professional. And I think at a time in our politics where fake news and misinformation and AI are seen as threats, and are threats, frankly, to the security of our democracy, and indeed in this House, in Prime Minister's questions earlier, when we have members standing up and spreading fake news about vaccines and things, isn't it a great honour and a great thing of pride in our country that our Electoral Commission is held in such high regard by the voters who rely on the Electoral Commission to safeguard the independence of elections, to safeguard democracy itself, because fairness and accountability within electoral regulation depends on a strong and independent regulator, which is what the Electoral Commission is. It fulfills that absolutely vital role to oversee our elections and regulate political finance in the UK. And the Commission's independence is established in a statute as a public body, independent of government, accountable to Parliament through the Speaker's Committee on the Electoral Commission, of which, of course, I'm the spokesperson and regularly attend this chamber and answer questions from colleagues from both sides of the House about the work of the Commission. And actually, in a healthy and modern democracy, we should be seeking, on matters of democracy and regulation of elections, to find compromise and not to allow one party to set all the rules. Because after all, whilst one party might be in government today, there will have to be an election, and should another party form the next government, they of course could form the next statement. And we need to make sure that the structures that we agree as a House can withstand changes of political party and political parties that may not be represented in this House today, but may one day be elected to this House, who might not value democracy as much as I know all honourable and right honourable friends do. Because this structure that we are being asked to approve today comes straight out of a Republican Party playbook of politicising the Electoral Commission. And I think that those of us that see this as a threat do so because we look at what's going on in other countries and in other democracies, but we also look at what's been going on here and through the various iterations of Conservative governments that we've had for the past 14 years. My honourable friend for Glasgow North set out in his speech some of this already, but it's worth reiterating that this is not a first offence. This is a government that repealed the Fixed Term Parliament Act to allow a Prime Minister to decide when the starting whistle can be blown on a general election. This is a government which changed the way that electoral registration worked to move from household registration to individual electoral registration, which meant that millions of people fell off the electoral roll, and at that point took that snapshot to decide that those were the numbers that they were going to draw new electoral boundaries on. Oh, by the way, those electoral boundaries, Madam Deputy Speaker, were for 600 MPs because at that point that looked advantageous to the Conservative Party. But then we had the 2019 general election and the picture looked a little bit different. So then it was more electorally advantageous for the Conservative Party to have 650 MPs. So guess what happened, Madam Deputy Speaker? Yes, with absolutely no explanation, we went back to 650. The freedom to protest, to peacefully protest, which is an important part of a democracy, curtailed under this government, and the Elections Act, which contains a plethora of different things which are damaging to the security and safety of our democracy. Now, the photo ID element has been widely spoken about in this House, but it is true that for some voters it is easier to vote using photo ID than for others. And a minister, an ex-minister now, I believe, slipped up and accidentally said what was actually going on, which is things to attempt to gerrymander in your favour might suddenly be found to not. Indeed, that was an attempt to make it harder for those who were not planning to vote Conservative vote and to make it easier for those who were planning to vote Conservative to vote, although arguably it did backfire somewhat. But we also have a government that's also changing about the rules about who can vote, and that is important too. Because this week we have seen changes which remove the 15-year limit on overseas voters. So we now have a situation where you can have lived out of this country for 16 years and now you can vote in UK general elections. But a 16-year-old who's lived in the UK all their life can't, because who gets to decide to vote is political. And this is the politicisation of the Electoral Commission. The Elections Act changes the electoral system for police and crime commissioners and mayors for party political advantage for the Conservative Party. Raising the threshold for spending for political parties at general elections, absolutely no explanation as to why that way above inflation increase has come in, other than the fact the Conservative Party feel confident that they have that money to spend at the general election. And now the strategy and policy statement to direct the work of our independent commission. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm going to call this out for what it is the politicisation of the Independent Electoral Commission, and all members of this House who believe in the independence of our Electoral Commission would do well to cast their vote against this motion today, because the consequences of this, Madam Deputy Speaker, I believe will be far-ranging. The content of the statement that the Minister has read out several times now, and not actually the point, is the principle of which a government, any government in future, may set out the direction and policy priorities for an independent electoral commission. So frankly, Madam Deputy Speaker, let's keep politics out of the Electoral Commission and let's oppose this motion today.
Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's a real privilege to follow my honourable friend, the member for Lancaster and Fleetwood, who made some excellent points. But I do refer to my register of interest, as I too am the Vice President of the Local Government Association. And I do want to make a very short speech against the Government's motion and the Conservative Party's efforts to undermine the elections watchdog, the Electoral Commission. The last Labour government set up the Electoral Commission to protect Britain's democracy by the independent regulation of free and fair elections. And this independence from government of any shade must be crystal clear for voters and campaigners to see. And as a member of the Speakers Committee, and for the Minister's benefit, the member for Luton South, I've already shared my opposition to the Government's draft strategy and policy statement on the Electoral Commission. At a time when trust in our politics is low, ministers using this statement to set a political agenda for the Electoral Commission is a dangerous act, undermining its independence. And it's been so well put by my honourable friend, the member for Sheffield South East as well. Even on its own merits, the statement fails to explain why it is required in the first place, and it provides no further support to scrutinise the Commission's work. So it begs the question, what's the point? Because, as we know, there is cross-party agreement that the Commission's independence is vital to the health of our democracy, and both the Levelling Up Housing and Communities Committee and the Speakers Committee have concluded that no statement is necessary. And we have the Electoral Commission rightly pointing out that the repeal of the power for government to designate a statement would improve confidence and trust in our electoral system. So it begs the question, why did the government introduce the strategy and policy statement power in the Elections Act? Maybe if we put it in the context of a very unpopular, declining Conservative Party, one that is out of all ideas, it could be suggested that they're trying to assert an unfair influence on the rules of engagement of the next general election. Because alongside the strategy and policy statement power, the Elections Act also introduced repressive voter ID requirements, a solution to a non-existent issue, and yet we're still waiting to see any action or prioritisation of the real issues facing our democracy, such as disinformation and AI, and there's no concerted plan to get underrepresented groups and those turning 18 onto the electoral register. So will the Minister explain why this is the case? Because, as so well put by my honourable friend, the member for Lancaster and Fleetwood, we're seeing an alarming trend emerging, a government tightening its grip around the delicate functioning of democracy. It seems the Conservative Party is purposefully seeking to undermine public trust through this statement in order to serve its own interests, or maybe the Minister can try again to convince us otherwise. Is it arrogance or is it weakness that's informing these decisions? In any event, the public is not under any illusions and can see it for what it is. So on this side, we will continue to oppose all reckless acts that threaten to undermine our democracy, and Labour will fight for every vote in every part of the country. The only people who will be deciding on Britain's future is the British public. Thank you.
Richard Foord.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I should say from the very off that I would not allege that the government wants to achieve something untoward in the statement that it's made today. And I'm not for a moment suggesting that it is seeking somehow to introduce this guidance for the Electoral Commission to enable its own political advantage for the Conservative Party. However, perception matters. And so when we hear the Minister referring to this as being about resilient, open, transparent, secure, modern, fair democracy, I think many of our constituents will really question what is wrong with the current system. And the fact is, there is nothing wrong with the current system of the Electoral Commission reporting to the House and not the government. Madam Deputy Speaker, I received a considerable amount of correspondence from constituents on this subject. I was surprised. I thought this would be of very little interest to people in Devon, but actually, I'll give you an example. I'll give you, Madam Deputy Speaker, an example of the sort of correspondence that I received. As your constituent, I'm urging you to please consider voting against the draft Electoral Commission strategy and policy statement on Wednesday. No government or political party should be able to have any say in the Commission's strategy or policy. The Electoral Commission exists to run elections. It seems obvious to me and to my Liberal Democrat colleagues that not only the Electoral Commission needs to be impartial, but it needs to be seen to be impartial. So these concerns that have been expressed by my constituents are felt also by my party. They're also felt by two committees of this House, the Cross-Party Levelling Up and Housing Committee, the DLUP Committee that so very ably chaired, and the Speaker's Committee that has brought forward this third report of the Electoral Commission in 2023. These committees have made it very plain that we don't need this additional government guidance to the Electoral Commission. And if that weren't enough, the Commission itself says that the government having a strategy and policy statement is inconsistent with the independent role of the Electoral Commission. That's why I and my Liberal Democrat colleagues will be voting against this SI.
Dawn Butler.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Minister's better than this motion. Let's all agree with that. I think it's a hangover from the SNP spokesperson was saying. I think it's a hangover from Boris Johnson days when the Electoral Commission upset him, and so he wanted to influence them. But I mean, the Minister can correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, the government claims that this strategy will enhance the parliamentary accountability of the Electoral Commission, and increase public confidence in its work. But as everybody has stated here today,
it's going to do the complete opposite.
Exactly.
And this strategy and policy statement is little more than an attempt to undermine the independence of the Electoral Commission and an attempt by this government to stamp its own agenda on the regulation of our democracy. And so what this is, it is a fight for our democracy and making sure, and you know, we need to take back control in this House. And I think it is important because trying to avoid transparency and accountability seems to be the hallmark of this government.
Yeah.
And don't just take my word for it. The Electoral Commission itself wrote to MPs this week stressing that the principle of independence is crucial to maintaining confidence in our electoral system.
Yeah.
And they warned us in this House, and I quote directly, the introduction of mechanisms such as a strategy and policy statement by which a government can guide an Electoral Commission's work is inconsistent with the independent role.
Exactly.
So if they're saying that, the Speakers Committee is saying that, why is it that the Minister's trying to convince us otherwise? It really doesn't make any sense. No. And this, as we've heard many times, this isn't the first time this government has attempted to rig our democracy, force through a voter ID system which threatened to disenfranchise the most vulnerable in society. The government, and remember, and my honourable friend mentioned it, the honourable member for North East Somerset, when he made it slip out that it was a deliberate attempt to manipulate electoral outcomes in favour of the Conservative Party, and then went, whoops, made a mistake. I said it out loud, the quiet bit out loud. So it isn't a shock that the government is once again attempting to influence an independent body that oversees our elections. But it is something that should shock us all. Madam Speaker, this draft strategy and policy statement sets out the government's strategic and policy priorities for the Electoral Commission. It also contains guidance of which, and I quote, the Commission must have regard in the discharge of its functions. This places on them a concerning legal duty to consider first and foremost the government's priorities when fulfilling its duties.
Exactly.
If it does that, then it cannot be independent. And the whole point is it's supposed to be independent.
Yeah.
It is simply unacceptable for the government to direct the Commission on how it should carry out its functions. And do you know what, Madam Speaker? If a foreign government was wielding this much power over their elections, there would be calls to send in independent advisers to ensure that their elections were being held democratically. That is how bad this is. When people say, you know, do we have corruption in our government? I say, yes, we do. And I say, and this is an example of that. The government keeps focusing on prevention and detection of voter fraud, yet there is little evidence that voter fraud is widespread.
Yeah.
In fact, it's so rare, there was only 9 convictions.
Order. The Honourable Lady talked about corruption in government. I do want her to withdraw that. She needs to rephrase what she said. And she does know that. She's very experienced. So I would ask her to say that she would withdraw any allegations of corruption within government at this point. Dawn Butler.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I withdraw that I have said that the government is corrupt, or there is corruption in the government. I don't know for sure, but I withdraw. There are issues, though, Madam Deputy Speaker, that need tackling, and this doesn't do it. There are considerations that's rising, as we heard, like threats of AI, generative AI, the use of deep fakes, the spread of disinformation, the scraping of people's data. None of that is tackled today. And according to, and I wonder why, but according to fact-checking organisation First Draft, 88% of the Conservative Party's most shared online adverts in the final days of the 2019 general election were found to have contained misleading information. 88%.
Wow.
And so I hope that we can agree, and I hope the Minister will change his mind when he gets to his feet, because he is respected across the House, and this is going to damage his reputation.
Exactly,
so I do hope that he will change his mind, and I urge the House, as I said earlier, to take back control and reject this motion.
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I first of all thank all honourable and right honourable members for their contributions this afternoon. Can I just address the last line of the honourable lady's speech from Brent Central? I've been very grateful to colleagues on that side of the House who have said some rather nice and kind words about me personally. Whether I deserve those nice and kind words, I won't press to a division. I'm not sure how my side of the House would vote. Let me just say this, and I say this in all seriousness. If I thought that the intentions that sit behind this statement, or the Act, or any of the statutory instruments which have flowed from the Elections Act, did what honourable members have asserted that they have, I hope that the House knows me well enough to say that I would have tendered my resignation to the Prime Minister. I am absolutely convinced, as a Democrat, as somebody who has stood in elections and lost elections and won elections and has served in this place only for 8.5 years, that there is nothing malign or mission creep in anything which we are discussing today. Now, I'm not expecting that sentiment to change the votes of members opposite, but I say it sincerely. A number have asked where this statement came from. The genesis of the statement, it's of course to be found at sections 4A to 4E of the Elections Act, the inserted section of the Political Parties Elections and Referendums Act of 2000. So that's where it comes from. Let me try and address, if I may, some of the comments which have been made. My shadow, the Honourable Lady for Vauxhall, said that there was a political agenda. There's not. We paid full regard to the submissions of consultees, and we took a different view to them. That is perfectly fine. That does not undermine the system, nor is it a dangerous politicisation of the Commission. My right honourable friend was right, I believe, a distinguished former elections minister for Norwich North, when she refers to this as a reasonable vehicle. She asked about my discussions with the Commission. I have had a very useful meeting with their senior team, where we discussed a range of issues and where we can work together to support and buttress our democracy. Those conversations will continue. And of course, the statement is iterative and organic, and it can of course be refreshed to reflect issues and challenges as they arise in the field of AI, overseas involvement, etc. And the House will notice, Madam Deputy Speaker, that I use the word as they arise, not if. My honourable friend, the member for Glasgow North, and I do call him an honourable friend because he is a friend, he asks, where is the parliamentary sovereignty? When the division bell rings, that is the exercise of Parliament's sovereignty. He will vote accordingly. The honourable gentleman for Sheffield South East, in a rather confusing way, said that he thought the statement was wrong because it didn't mandate the Commission, it didn't tell the Commission what to do, and then went on in almost the same breath to say how frightful it would be if the statement could do that. I'm afraid the honourable gentleman is proving to be, on this issue, and on this issue alone, a little bit of a push-me, pull-you, because the independence of the Commission is absolutely safe and sacrosanct. And let me just reread back into the record from the statement. The duty to have regard does not require the Commission to give lesser priority to or to ignore any of its statutory duties. The electoral commissioners and the Commission's executive leadership will remain responsible for determining the Commission's strategy, priorities, how it should discharge its duties, and so on and so forth within its 5-year plan. The Commission will not be reporting to me, nor my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State. Number 10, the Cabinet Office. It will continue to report to Parliament through Mr Speaker's committee using the functions which it has. Will he forgive me? Because the House has got a lot of business. The House has got a lot of business today, and the House has got a lot of business today, and let me just try and address. Let me address the points which have been raised by others, because I want to give due attention to the points which they have made. The Honourable Lady, the member for Lancaster and Fleetwood, really should have a word with her own front bench about overseas voters. Because let me quote from her honourable friend in the statutory instrument that we took upstairs on Wednesday, the 6th of December last, where from the Labour front bench she told the committee, "We do not oppose the principle of overseas voting and giving citizens who still have a strong connection to the UK a voice in our elections. And that includes people who still have a strong connection to our local services and communities." So the Honourable Lady is entirely out of step with her honourable friend on the front bench. I give way to, of course I give way to her.
The Minister for giving way this time. I wish to object that the Minister is very much misportraying the point I was making in my remarks. And the point I was making in my remarks is that it is a political decision to decide who gets to vote, and I was comparing 16-year-olds in the UK compared to someone who, say, lived outside of the UK for 16 years. That was the point I was raising, and I don't think that's inconsistent with my own party's front bench at all.
I, Madam Deputy Speaker, heard the Honourable Lady very clearly say that in principle she was opposed to overseas. If I misheard her, then I apologise, but that was certainly the thrust of the remarks that she had made. I say to the Honourable Lady for Luton South, she must forgive me. I was thinking of my own constituency, which of course is North, but the Honourable Lady for Luton South. She describes this statement as being a political agenda. Improving disabled access, a political agenda. If so, if that's the charge, I'm going to plead guilty. Cracking down on electoral fraud, if that's the charge, clap me in irons. Ensuring that the rules are promoted, that the rules of registration and the importance of voter ID take me off to the tower, Madam Deputy Speaker. I plead guilty as charged. And I'll give way to the Chairman.
I think the Minister rather misportrayed what I actually said. What I said was, there's a statement here which either it seeks to change how the Electoral Commission operates, in which case it's interference with an independent body, or it doesn't seek to do that, in which case, what is the point of it?
Yeah, exactly.
The point, as I have consistently said, Madam Deputy Speaker, is to augment and buttress the work of the Commission and to give some reference tools in Parliament's assessment. I also want to take issue, and I hope again I heard her correctly, the Honourable Lady for Lancaster and Fleetwood, who prayed in aid the Fixed-Term Parliament Act, as if it was an ancient symbol of our democratic function that we had repealed. It sat for 5 years as a way of giving confidence to the markets that a coalition of two parties could deliver the clean-up strategy that her party had left behind in 2010. So its repeal was not a dismantling of some great permanent piece of our democratic architecture. And the Honourable Lady for Brent Central seemed to refer to this as a vendetta against the Commission. Let me just invite the Honourable Lady. She referred, Madam Deputy Speaker, as a vendetta. I wrote the word down. The record will say that she thought that Mr Johnson, as Prime Minister, was waging a vendetta against the Commission because the Commission had said something with which he disagreed. It was the word the Honourable Lady used. I replay it back to her advisedly. I took a contemporaneous note of the word as she used it. Let me just say to her, invite her to consider, if we wished to wage a war against the Commission, we could neuter it, we could fetter it, we could force it to report to us, we could abolish it. We haven't and we won't. Why won't we? Why aren't we? Because we know that the Commission is important, we respect its work, we honour and cherish and guard its independence. We believe that this statement and the previous legislation that this House has put through will augment the accountability of the Commission to Parliament and, in so doing, serve this as its sole and only purpose, to build on Parliament's and the public's confidence in its work. The Commission was independent, the Commission is independent. The Commission will continue to be independent. I commend this motion to the House.
The question is motion number 2, as on the order paper. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. No! Division, clear the lobby. Motion number 2, as on the order paper. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. No. Tellers for the ayes, Ruth Edwards and Amanda Milling. Tellers for the noes, Kim Ledbetter and Gerald Jones. Order. Order.
The ayes to the right, 273. The noes to the left, 190.
Thank you. The ayes to the right, 273. The noes to the left, 190. So the ayes have it, the ayes have it. Unlock. Thank you. We now come to the